Welcome, folks, to another edition of Ranking the Albums. And look who we got here with us today. The usual trio of reviewers here to go through the catalog of Pink Floyd today.
Oh, by the way, which one's Pink?
Which one's Floyd? All right. So obviously with us today is none other than Mr. David Hens, who we announced first, and Mr. Thom Jennings, who's always announced second. I was told that from now on, that's how it's got to be. It's in the contract.
It's just alphabetical. That's all. Contractually, I feel like I should be introduced first because I'm older. But you know, it's your show.
All right.
So you do what you got to do.
Well, it's our show, but let's get rolling and let's roll up our sleeves and dig into this one because there's a lot of stuff here. 12 albums we're ranking. We decided not to count the soundtracks, and which are more and obscured by clouds, and we also decided to leave out the instrumental Endless River there. It just they just don't fit in with the rest of the catalog, so we're gonna rank the rest of them though, including that leaves us with 12 altogether. So we're gonna start it right away. What do you got for number 12, David?
Number 12, I'm going to go with Amagama from 69. I mean, it's the first album without Syd Barrett in the band, and it's just kind of a sleeper. And I remember reading an interview where even the band talked about they don't like it anymore. They thought it was a lackluster effort. So, I mean, really, there's really nothing that stands out to me on that album. And even like Robert Christgau was the big critic for the Village Voice a long time ago, and I'm not a big fan of him overall with his views, but even he said it was music to fall asleep to. And I think it's kind of, I mean, there's a reason you never heard anything from it on the radio, or it's not even really talked about highly within the band's catalog. So yeah, it's got to be number 12 for me.
And what do you got there, Thom?
Yeah, I got this at number 12 as well. So for much the same reason. This is a weird album. It's like half live and half studio. I don't think the live stuff is bad. In fact,
No.
it's weird because the versions of Set the Controls to the Heart of the Sun, Set Your Controls to the Heart of the Sun. Man, somebody out, some Pink Floyd fanatic's gonna be like yelling at me like, you got the title wrong. But that one, it sounds pretty close to the original. So the live versions are okay. I mean, they actually sound more like studio versions than they do live versions. But yeah, I think generally speaking, this isn't an album that I think what it comes down to, kind of like what David said, it's not that it just doesn't have anything that really makes it stand out at all.
All right, well, you guys agree on that. I'm throwing up a different one here at my number 12, and that is going to be Atom Heart Mother, which I don't know. For me, I just really couldn't get into this album. Gave it a bunch of listens over the years here, and for some reason, I just really can't seem to get into it at all compared to any of the other ones. I wouldn't say it's a bad album by any standards. As far as a bad one when you hear one, but it just the bottom 5 for me are all pretty much neck and neck kind of, and this one just happened to, when I reviewed them, when I did my final analysis here, this is where it ended up. So Atom Heart Mother, number 12. That takes us to our number 11.
Yeah, 11, I have Atom Heart Mother, so we're not too far off on that.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's another record that I'm pretty sure Roger Waters has called embarrassing. I mean, because they really hadn't found their sound quite yet, or at least the sound that we knew to be Pink Floyd later on. So, I mean, I think the best thing about the album is the cover, just with the cow on the front. It's kind of an iconic image. It's been made into a lot of shirts over the years. But yeah, I mean, it's not really progressive in the sense that they were like, the 70s progressive rock as it became known later. But yeah, they were still kind of on the fringe between what the product that would come later and the psychedelic aspects of the late 60s. So it's kind of in the middle. But yeah, there's not really a whole lot on this record I would go back and revisit. So yeah, it's my number 11.
All right, Mr. Jennings.
Man, you guys are gonna be shocked when Atom Heart Mother's my number 1. And I may not be kidding. Anyhow, My number 11 is The Final Cut. And I don't know. There's just something about this album that's just so depressing. It's just I don't know. I have a copy of it on vinyl. I had a friend. This to me may be, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, because folks out there in your comments, you let me know when I'm wrong. But I know I'm wrong sometimes. But and again, opinions are very subjective. This is one of those albums where I think you either love it or you hate it. It's not a that people don't have lukewarm opinions about this record. A very good friend of mine, Anthony Camesso, who will never watch this video, but if he does, hey Anthony, and he loved this record, and he used to play it for me all the time, trying to convince me to love it. And I don't know, I just didn't. I never took a liking to it. I just think it has, again, it was at a point in the band where Waters had taken control to the point where it's more of a Waters solo album. And I think Waters solo albums kind of suffer from the fact that he doesn't have somebody to balance them out at times. So, and again, trying to kind of to work off the coattails of the wall, it just didn't work. So that's my number 11.
Okay.
Or did I say 11? Yeah.
Yep. You're
Okay.
right. Okay. Well, my number 11 is going to be A Saucer Full of Secrets, which is the second Pink Floyd album here. Yeah, this one for me, like I said, the bottom four were pretty much neck and neck, 4 or 5 albums here, and that's just kind of where it falls for me. For me, it's a little bit better than Adam Hart Mother. But not a lot better, It's just they're all those albums down there kind of, for me, they just kind of, that's where they all fit. Like I said, nothing too memorable on it. Trying to even think of I guess obviously we just heard this one the other night when we heard the Gilmore Project, but I would say Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun is probably the one song that stands out on the album more than any of the others. And so I mean, not too much more to add here from my aspect of it here, but that's what I've got here for my number 11 here. So it takes us down to number 10.
Yeah, 10, I have Saucer Full of Secrets also. I mean, it's the last album with Sid, and like you said, I think Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun is definitely the centerpiece of this album. I mean, they used to give some pretty epic live performances that you can watch on YouTube and stuff. And I think the only other song that really works for me on here is Jugman Blues. It's definitely one that's written by Sid, and it's kind of weird, but it's got a nice kick to it. It closes out the album, but yeah, I mean, it's not quite as good as The Piper at the Gates of Dawn is. It's like a slight drop off, but it's not a terrible record.
All right, what do you got there, Tom?
Number 1, 0 is Adam Hart Mother. We've already with this, so I'm the last one that comes to the party for Adam Hart Mother, and I don't know. I can't really add anything else to the conversation other than the fact I'm not a fan of the cover. I think the cover's just kind of, I don't know. It's a cow. Unless you like cows, why do you like the cover?
Well, REO had a cow on their cover.
They had a cow hide. I don't think they had an actual cow. Wasn't it a cow that was branded with the REO?
I guess.
Yeah, so it wasn't an actual cow. And actually, I don't even know if it was a cow. It might have been a deer. I don't know. That's somebody out there knows.
All right. So I'm going for my number 10. I've got Umagama, whatever you want to say. That's the one. That's the one you had for your guys is number 12. I like this one just a little bit better than these other two. The Narrow Way stood out for me, and like you said, Tom, I think they did pretty good renditions of the live album. This is kind of a hard one to rank because of the fact it's only got a few songs on there that were studio versions, and then the rest was live. And usually albums like this, we usually don't rank, but this time we decided to add it in here. Lord knows why, but anyhow, we did, and that's where it falls for me at number 10 there. All right, so what we got for number 9 now?
Number 9, I'm going to go with Momentary Lapse of Reason from '87. It's not a bad record. I mean, I really like On the Turning Away, and I think The Dogs of War is like the heaviest song on their out record, and I always really like that. It's got the edge to it that I think they lost when Waters left the band. But I mean, Gilmour's guitar playing is excellent as always. But I don't know. I feel like there was always like Gilmour brought kind of the soul to the band with his guitar playing, but in terms of like the lyrics and like the social commentary, I think Waters brought that, and I think that's why they work so well together, because they balance each other out. And I think without Waters, I mean, the songwriting kind of suffered a little bit for me. So I don't look at it as highly as some of the others.
Just to me, man, we were just cruising along here, folks. Well, I think because the bottom of the catalog, you said it's. I have a sense that we're probably going to have like the same top 4 in terms of the same albums, maybe not in the same order, but because it looks like we have pretty much the same bottom 8. But yeah, I have for this one, I've got Saucer Full of Secrets. So I think the only one that you guys haven't hit that I've hit already is the Final Cut. But yeah, Saucer Full of Secrets, again, we're kind of getting into territory where there's not any real duds of albums per se, and this is definitely not a dud of an album, but it's kind of a transitional album, I suppose, to put it mildly. And it's really, I mean, Pink Floyd, in my estimation, had 3 very distinct eras. You had the Barrett era, well, maybe 4. So you had the Barrett era. Then I feel like you had kind of, by the time they get to Dark Side, you have the band era where everybody's kind of contributing. And then you have the Waters era. And then you have the Gilmour era. So this one is kind of, what's weird is that it started out with a strong Barrett influence, and then Barrett's influence wanes, and then the band comes together, and then Waters, and then it goes Gilmour. So an important part of their history for sure. But yeah, still lower in the catalog in terms of quality. I mean, they were still kind of finding their footing, and obviously Barrett was becoming a problem at this point, if I know my Pink Floyd history.
All right, so for my number 9, I've got the debut, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Yeah, for me, this album, it's got some highlights there with Interstellar Overdrive. 2 of the songs that stand out good for me are the Scarecrow and Bike. Those are the last 2 songs on the album, but the album seems to end in a pretty cool note. But I think the problem for me, the beginning part of the album, it just didn't really grab me the way, usually you want the album to be, you want to be grabbed right away when you first put it on, really. And that's usually what people shoot for when they're putting a lead off track on and stuff. And for some reason, this one just didn't do anything for me until like almost when it was finished, which is kind of strange. You don't see that too often, but at least that's my take on it. But for a debut though, it was, a weird time, what year are we talking here? This was like
67.
Yeah. So, you had a lot of things going on there, the Beatles were still big. The Monkees were on their height of popularity, and, there was a lot going on there. And, they got their feet wet with this album, and there's a lot of, it's a lot of difference, the album is kind of a lot of variety on it in a way. But nothing stands out, like you would see like on a Stones album or, anything, the Kinks, stuff like that. All their contemporaries there, they're kind of just doing their own thing. And, I think it really took them a while to really find themselves, you know what I mean? But I mean, it was an okay debut, though. Don't get me wrong. That's why it's not number 12, and it's only at number 9. All right, so we got number 8 now.
Yeah, at 8, I'm gonna go with the Division Bell from '94. Yeah, it's slightly better than Momentary Lapse of Reason from '87, but still, the productions are very similar. The songs kind of sound the same. I mean, High Hopes is the album closer, and I think that's the best song on it. I mean, that's one of Gilmore's great guitar solos in the catalog, I think. And Bob Ezrin does some pretty solid production work on the album too. But yeah, I mean, even I remember when it came out, Robert Waters dismissed it as complete rubbish from beginning to end, which is just a classic Waters reaction to anything that he's not involved in. So, but yeah, you can definitely feel. I mean, it's a slight improvement, but yeah, it's not as good as the earlier stuff. So.
I remember. I'm laughing because I remember an interview with Waters. There was some kind of back in the days when they used to do like album releases where the artist would talk about each song. So like the first time you'd hear the song on the radio, it'd be, some special program, and then the artist would talk about each song and sometimes take calls. So this one episode, I think, was right after Waters released Radio Chaos. They were going through the songs, and and they finally, the last call snuck in and was like, hey man, blah, 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 what do you think of that new Pink Floyd album? And it was like a call. It felt like it got past the screener, and Roger just goes, "Oh, I think it's a pretty fair forgery." He goes, "Should be. There's a million people involved on the album." But and that leads into my next my next one in the ranking, which is A Momentary Lapse of Reason. And in some ways, as much as Roger was very acerbic and nasty when he said that, there's a bit of truth to it. I mean, especially more with A Momentary Lapse of Reason than a Division Bell, because really A Momentary Lapse of Reason started out as a David Gilmour solo record, and eventually evolved into a Pink Floyd record because let's face it, folks, Pink Floyd's name sells records. You take the same record and you call it a David Gilmour record, it's certainly not going to sell anywhere near as many copies. So I could see Roger being upset by it, but the reality is that bands change and members change and all that kind of stuff. And I still think it's a really good album.
I think it's better than Radio Chaos.
Oh, yeah, I like Radio Chaos a lot better than the Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, because I think Pros and Cons is, but actually Pros and Cons was presented to Floyd at the same time as The Wall, and they got to choose which one they were going to record. They definitely picked the better one of the two, but it's and I think we fall. It's weird because I think even as fans we kind of fall into the spat between Gilmour and Waters. And at the end of the day, it really their best work is always when it's the two of them. They've done some really good things, and even as the leader of a particular Pink Floyd album, they've done some good things. But they still are better when they're together and at least somewhat functioning and getting along. But yeah, so I put Momentary Lapse of Reason, and it to me, it's. I was literally just listening to this record today, because it was one of the few that I hadn't reviewed or hadn't listened to in quite some time before we did the ranking. And it just sounds like, Gilmour was really kind of trying to go for that Wish You Were Here kind of vibe. And I think he did a pretty good job with that. But yeah, like you said earlier, David, you can say what you want about Roger Waters. I mean, the dude can write some lyrics. I mean, he does not write, pithy lyrics. And I think that Momentary Lapse of Reason, the other reason I think it's a little less, not quite as good as the Division Bell, is because it does kind of sound a little more dated, doesn't it? I mean, I think that Saucer Full of Secrets sounds very much of its time to a certain degree, with Piper at the Gates of Dawn, but a little less so. But A Momentary Lapse of Reason just definitely sounds, production wise, I mean, everything wise, it just sounds like a product of the 80s,
Okay. All right. So there's your number 8. And mine is going to bring up one of those albums you guys just mentioned, the Division Bell. Of course, came out in 1994, 7 years after Momentary Lapse of Reason. Yeah, I might be in a different boat. You guys all kind of picked, I believe you guys picked Momentary as the lesser of the two, but in my thing here, I actually got it reversed. But they're close. They're, they're similar in their ranking for me. I just feel that there's more that I like on Momentary than the Division Bell. Mainly because I feel the Division Bell really didn't have much airplay compared to the Momentary. Obviously, Learning to Fly was huge. On the Turning Away was huge. So you had more radio airplay, and by the time Division Bell came out, the whole musical landscape had changed. It was we're right in the middle of grunge and all kinds of chaos going on. And but that being said, Division Bell, there are a few solid tracks in here that I really enjoy. Marooned, I thought was the guitar solo on that is unbelievable. A Great Day for Freedom stands out as one of the more memorable songs on the album, and Take It Back is another one I really enjoyed. But just a little, not quite as good for me as a Momentary, although they're in the same area. But that's where I stand with this album. Which at this point we're starting to get away from the early albums, and this is now we're getting into what Thom had called the Gilmore era here. So,
Right.
and that's where you guys kind of started to come into on your own there too by picking the Momentary. So, all right, yeah. So that takes us down to number 7. Should be interesting from this point on forward here.
Yeah, 7. I have the Piper at the Gates of Dawn from '67. It's definitely the most influenced by Syd Barrett, and he was fully immersed in the LSD and psychedelia of the time and all that stuff. So I mean, yeah, like just the song like Bike, which closes out the album. I mean, it almost comes off like a novelty track, but it's definitely right up like that alley of the British humor and a lot of the sensibility of the time. But I mean, it's a good record. I mean, Sid, he was probably the most lucid he at any point when he was in the band on that during the making of that record, because by '68 he was pretty much losing it. But yeah, I mean, it's an iconic record for the time, and I mean, I don't think it's one I would go back and listen to quite often, but I think for what it is, it works. So.
All right, what do you got there for us, Mr. Jennings?
Oh, where were we? Well, we'll get to the Division Bell. I think it's I think David said it. And I think you've kind of alluded to it, Joey, that the Division Bell and Momentary Lapse of Reason. And it's funny, until you said it, I didn't realize there were so many years between them. I mean, it's kind of interesting to think about. It felt like those two albums were back to back, like fairly quickly. But man, 7 years is a long time.
Yeah.
And they sound an awful lot alike for two records that are so close together. But the reason I give the Division Bell a little bit higher marks is because Richard Wright was definitely much more involved in the writing of it, so it made it. And I believe Nick Mason was probably involved early on as well. But because again, Momentary was it started out as a Gilmore project, and they kind of massaged it to turn it into a Pink Floyd album, kind of like 90125 with Yes, although Yes was much more successful with the model. But they did the same thing. I mean, that started out as a group called Cinema, and then they just tacked some stuff on and decided to use the Yes brand. And King Crimson did it. I think there was a group called Discipline, and they wanted being called King Crimson so they could sell units. But either way, Division Bell, I think, is just it's a nice listen. It's a very relaxing record, not super exciting. I don't think there's any huge standout tracks per se, but it's like one that you can kind of put on, let it run through. And remember, this is the digital era too, so it wasn't like some of the earlier albums where there was a definite side 1 and a definite side 2.
Yeah.
And then they wound up calling a whole bunch of, I believe this is where they got that excess material for the Endless River, which we're not ranking.
Right.
But I like the Endless River. I mean, the Endless River, I don't want to use the term boring, because I think the Endless River is like one of those things that I listen to if I'm reading a book or something where I just need to not be distracted by the music, and it really creates kind of a good background noise. So I don't know, boring background noise, is that are those insults?
That's yeah, yeah. It's kind of the reason why we didn't rank it. It just really wouldn't. It just doesn't fit in with the rest of the catalog. Now, had they been a band that did more instrumentals and stuff like that, it'd be a different situation. But
Yeah, there's some vocals on the Endless
yeah,
River,
on the last song, that's about it. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, I'm gonna bring up an album that nobody's brought up here yet so far. So
Ooh.
yeah, we're gonna dig into metal. Metal
Huh.
number 7. Oh, I like the beginning part of the album. The first couple songs really, really catches your attention. One of These Days. Obviously, I believe we heard that the other night for the Gilmore Project. Willow, A Pillow of Winds, Fearless. Those are. I thought the album started off good, and I was really expecting it to get even better, but then it started to lose me a little with the second half. So I mean, obviously, this is the album that led into the precursor before the big one, the Dark Side of the Moon. So you could see how they were kind of heading in that direction. And there's that bridge. It's where everything bridges together, getting to that from the old style music, from like you can see the progression with each album, but it seems like the bridge from metal to Dark Side is where this band really, really took off here. Metal, it wasn't a really big hit at the time. It did end up going double platinum, but I think a lot of those sales were, once Dark Side got as big as it did, that's when people started really paying attention to Pink Floyd, and that's probably where they sold a lot of those copies, unfortunately. It only cracked number 70 here in the US when it was first released. So to end up with a double platinum album, yeah, over time maybe it sold some, but I really feel the Dark Side of the Moon helped push that album over platinum status. But it's a solid album. It came at number 7 for me, which I do enjoy it a lot more than the other ones that were behind it there. And from this point on, for me, this is where the Floyd albums really, really, I'm right in the thick of my rankings here. Like metal is where it all starts. To really, it's all up from here basically. So that's going to take us down to number 6.
All right. 6. I'm going to go with the Final Cut. I mean, it's divisive. It's probably the least collaborative of any Pink Floyd album. I mean, by this point, Rick Wright was out of the band, and Roger had pretty much been running it as a one-man show in a lot of ways. I mean, I think the biggest complaint about this album is there's not enough Gilmore guitar solos on here, because it just wasn't what Roger was looking for at that time. I mean, it's not a fun listen. The production's very cold. I mean, Roger's doing a lot of shouting, but I mean, the lyrics are kind of what put the album in high esteem for me, only because I mean, he dedicates the album to his dad. A lot of it was motivated by his distaste for Margaret Thatcher's foreign policies and her approach to the war and everything in the Falklands. So I mean, I can definitely see how a lot of people don't like it, because if you don't like Roger Waters' solo material for the most part, you probably wouldn't like this. But I mean, I think it's not an album you just throw on at a party to have a good time. It's almost kind of the record you have to just put on when you're by yourself and just listen to it to take it all in. But yeah, it's definitely one that has always kind of impressed me from a lyrical standpoint. So I mean, obviously I have it at number 6. So, but
All right, that takes us to Thom.
We got metal or medley. I wonder why they don't call it medley. Yeah, Echoes. I think you didn't mention Echoes, did you?
No.
Yeah. So funny story. I don't know if my wife's home yet or not. It's not that anybody out there cares, but so we went to go see the Gilmore Project the other night, and they were playing Echoes, which is like, I don't know, 22, 23 minutes long or something.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really good rendition, some pretty cool visuals in the background and everything with the water dripping. So about the middle of the song, my wife looks over to me and she goes, "This is boring." So I don't know. It's one of those songs that you really have to be committed to, these long songs, which some bands do very successfully. And I can see if you're not used to listening to Pink Floyd or some other prog rock bands. And I said it's weird because in so many ways, Pink Floyd really doesn't feel proggy to me. They feel like they're in a different category. But yeah, so I mean, it's I don't know. Metal's a pretty cool album. It's like you said, it's the table setter. That's a show we should do someday. The albums that foreshadowed or set the table for big albums, because one of these days is obviously just a very classic Pink Floyd cut. Just a very cool song. And again, I think at this point, even if you look at the writing credits, almost all the songs are written as collaborations. And with the exception, I think, of Saint-Tropez.
Tropez.
Yeah. You Spanish teachers out there are going Saint-Tropez. Yeah, sorry. I was sounding a little French. But yeah, that's what I got.
All right. Sounds good. And my number 6 is going to be Momentary Lapse of Reason. So it finally comes in, but it's down a little bit lower than where you guys had it. Yeah, Momentary Lapse of Reason. Like I mentioned, it was going to be a little bit higher than Division Bell. Not too much, 2 spots for me. Division Bell was at number 8, if you folks remember, a couple minutes ago, and then now we're down to 6. So and the songs that I mentioned, they had some big airplay. Another song I liked was Yet Another Movie. That was one that really stood out for me on that album. It just like Thom said, a product of its time. It sounded like it was from the 80s, and it definitely was, and it was definitely more compared to the other album that they made in the 80s, the Final Cut, the predecessor before everything happened there and Waters was out. But you could see that band going in that direction with David Gilmour at the helm. So that you got exactly pretty much probably what people expected, and then they had a very successful tour, and things it's weird, like Thom said, how it took them 7 years to come up with the next one. But too bad. I think they kind of lost. I think they failed to capitalize on their return there. Had Division Bell been released maybe 4 or 5 years sooner, who knows? We probably maybe would have gotten another Pink Floyd album out of the deal too. You just never know. But there we go.
Yeah, I don't think they needed the money though.
No. Well,
I think that's sadly, I think a lot of that is what it comes down to.
All right, we're getting into the top 5 here. Let's do it.
Yeah, 5. I have metal. I mean, 71 was a great year for prog records with like Genesis, Nursery Crime was also a big album from that year. But yeah, for metal, for me, it really just comes down to One of These Days and Echoes just kind of bookending the album. And I mean, there was stuff in between is good, but I mean, the first time I heard Echoes, I was hooked to Pink Floyd instantly. I just think it's a masterpiece. But there's really not a dull moment in that song. It's for being a 20+ minute track. But that was where you saw the seeds being sown for what we would hear on Dark Side of the Moon later on. So I just think it's a great record.
All right. What you got for
So
number 5?
when you say there's never a dull moment, you're disagreeing with my wife, is what you're saying, David.
I'm pretty sure my wife would say the same thing. So
yeah, it's what I'm saying. It's weird. I mean, I guess Pink Floyd's probably one of those bands where you don't see a lot of female fans. It's sort of like Rush,
Yeah.
I was the good we for everybody out there listening, the 3 of us were actually in the same room, which is unusual, last night, seeing John Anderson of Yes. And speaking of, Echoes being kind of this epic, and Anderson did a whole bunch of these big Yes epics. And I noticed there was a lot of women at the show, just still kind of Gaga over John. So he definitely has some a little bit more frontman appeal. But not to get too far off a beaten trail, but I think in some ways that's Pink Floyd was one of those weird bands that didn't have like a member that the girls were Gaga over. You know what I mean? I mean, they were one of those bands you felt like they could probably just walk down to the corner store and you may not even recognize them. They were just they just didn't. They weren't like they were like the anti-Beatles in terms of the image. It's kind of weird. But so I have for number 5, and I think we're pretty much trending towards what I said. I think we're going to have the same top 4 as everyone else in the rest of the world. I have Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and we've already talked about this record. My ranking has more to do, I guess, with the historic significance of it. It's really the album that sets the puts the car on the road, so to speak, or the train on the track. It's just the beginning of the band. It's got the mystique because it still has Syd Barrett as part of the lineup, and really it's for a debut album. It's pretty solid. I mean, some bands start out slow and take a while to work up, and I guess you can make the argument that it still took Pink Floyd 4 or 5 albums to really become this huge phenomena. But I think this was an important start of their career, so that's why I put it as high as I did.
I see.
It definitely sounds dated, though. I mean, it sounds like an album from 1967. And I remember 67. I was 1 year old. So
there you go.
Am I the only one that was alive when that first album came out?
What month did it come out in? That would tell you.
Oh, I don't know. You're born in 67?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm 66. So, well, David, I don't even want to ask what year you were born.
August 67.
I'll be 35 next week. So,
dang, dude, youngin'.
All right, so that's going to take me down to my number 5, which is going to throw off your top 4 theory, which I like to do.
I was going to guess that this is Final Cut, so I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're wrong. It's Animals.
Oh, okay. Well,
one of the weirdest albums of the Pink Floyd catalog. After follows 2 stellar albums, and then you get Animals, which is kind of out of left field in a way. The concept and everything behind it all, but. A solid album. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, it wouldn't be at my number 5 if it wasn't. I just like the rest of the albums better than this one, whether it's by a smidge or whatever the case may be. But Animals definitely a unique album. It was big because it did hit number 3, coming up at the heels of "Wish You Were Here." Ended up going 4 times platinum. It's definitely a solid album. But it's not one you usually see too much, back when they were, obviously once the Wall came out and stuff, they didn't really replicate much from it in concert because they had so many other great songs and albums to bring into the forefront here. But I think Animals kind of hides. It doesn't really get all of its just due because it's just, you fall right between "Wish You Were Here" and the Wall, and that preceding that was even "Dark Side of the Moon." So those 4 albums are all like right in a row, but Animals obviously is the least known of the 4. And I just feel that I like the Final Cut a little bit better than it. So that's where we're at here. And now we'll go into the next final 4. Here we go.
Yeah, I'm gonna go The Wall at number 4.
Wow.
I love the record, but there are a couple I just like a little bit more. I mean, obviously Comfortably Numb is the epic David Gilmour guitar solo. I mean, In the Flesh is great. Run Like Hell is classic. Mother, I like a lot of it, but I feel like unless you're sitting down and listening to it all the way through, there's a lot of filler on here that it doesn't. I mean, I understand it's part of the concept and it's an entire story being told, but I don't know, some of the stuff just doesn't flow as much as well as it used to for me. Maybe I probably maybe 5 years ago I may have had it higher, but for today it's sitting at number 4. I mean, it's a great record, and obviously the tour was monumental, and Roger Waters himself has toured on it quite a bit. in the
Yeah.
last 10 years doing the whole presentation and everything. But yeah, I mean, it's a great album and another great Bob Ezrin production. So
All right. What's number 4 for you, Tom?
Dark Side of the Moon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I again, we're top 4 territory, I think, except I think you're gonna have Final Cut in it. But yeah, I mean, I think the sweet spot of the band, let's face it, is that kind of, the whole Wall, Wish You Were, well, probably from Dark Side of the Moon to The Wall. I mean, that's their sweet spot as far as their career. Dark Side of the Moon to me it's a classic. It's certainly one that is the most accessible from the commercial era, if you want to name it something. I like to call it the band era, because with the exception of The Wall, which is definitely a Waters driven project, but I still feel there's a lot of band influence on The Wall, which is why it was successful. And Final Cut, I think, didn't quite make the same impact on me. But it's to some degree, I think it's overplayed, and it's almost, man, this is going to sound really weird. It's going to get some evil comments in the comment section. Maybe not. It's almost too good. It's almost just a hair too polished for me. Just a bit, you know what I mean? Like it's almost so perfect. It's too perfect. I think, you were just talking about Animals, for example, and I have that ranked higher, obviously, because I think Animals it's got a little bit of an edge to it. It's got a little grit to it. There's not a whole ton of grit in Dark Side of the Moon. It's to me, it's like, from a production standpoint, it is so flawless. It is so perfect. And it's just a beautiful listen. But I like things to have just a little bit more, of that kind of something, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Interesting. I never would have thought it would be outside the top 3. I thought our top 3 would all be the same. That really, yeah. Interesting. You guys really threw me for a loop, both of you, really, because I expected The Wall to be in your top 3 as well. But interesting. Well, let's see what we get. This makes it more fun going forward to try to see where you guys heads at for the rest of the catalog here. All right. Well, my number 4, you got it right on the head, on the nail there. Final Cut. There's no way it was going to beat the other 3 in my estimation. Final Cut, though, is definitely, like you said earlier about how the Roger Waters, pretty much it's basically his album, but Gilmour does have a few really good solos on this album. That really, actually, some people say they stand out as some of his best solos throughout any of the whole catalog, which is quite saying a lot, actually. I was kind of surprised that I was reading, saw some people mentioning about how those solos are like bigger than even some of the ones from the other albums that we haven't discussed yet. But this album, you knew it wasn't gonna do as good as The Wall. It just didn't have a lot of songs that got airplay. But I understand the theme behind it and what he was going for, and but I think if you listen to the album from beginning to end, it's definitely another one of those albums you do have to do that to really encompass everything that's going on here. But I definitely enjoyed it. That's why it's landing in at my 4th favorite Floyd album. So that's going to take us down to the top 3. Let's see what we got here.
yeah. All right, 3. I'm gonna go Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, pretty much what Tom said. It's essentially a perfect record, well, perhaps too much, but yeah, since it's celebrating the 50th anniversary this year, I feel like it's one of those records that's been analyzed to death just by everybody. And I mean, obviously for good reason. I think there's every track on it is iconic, and almost everything on it you'll hear on the radio at some point. I know 97 Rock wears it out, especially with Money. I mean, it's a great it's a great Gilmour guitar solo, but I'd be okay if I didn't hear it again. But yeah, I mean, I think the Great Gig in the Sky, I mean, Claire Torrey's vocal on that's one of my favorite vocals in the history of recorded music. I just think it's great. But it's right up there with Mary Clayton's vocal on Gimme Shelter for the Stones in terms of like the female vocals from that era. I think it's right up there. And I mean, and thematically, I mean, the songs are timeless. I mean, they're concepts that everybody can relate to. And it's interesting. I mean, I feel like a lot of the stuff that they were singing about and writing about at that time, it's almost more relevant to them at this point in their life now as compared to when they, like 50 years ago when they wrote it. So it's they were had kind of like an old soul kind of thinking to the production and the writing of the album. But
It's
yeah,
really
I mean,
fun. It's really
great.
funny you say that. I agree with you 100%. I think that is a very, very, very astute observation. Yes, it's like when you listen to, you know, another 10 years have gone behind you. When I hear that line, it's like I'm thinking, you guys, what do you mean 10 years behind you? I mean, you're in your 20s, you know, like you guys are talking like a bunch of old codgers in a nursing home. But yeah,
Yeah, and to your point about it almost being too perfect from a production standpoint, I think I just got this CD they put out as a live show from Wembley Stadium in '74. I think live where they play the whole album, I think it's even better because it's not, they don't tinker with it in the studio. It's just pretty much raw off the stage. I think the guitar has a little more bite to it. So if you haven't heard it yet, you should check it out. That's pretty good.
yeah, I've seen that one. And you know, the reason they're releasing all those is because of British copyright law. They have to release some of these recordings in some commercial form, even if it's only
Yeah.
for a short period of time. Otherwise, somebody can just release them for them. But yeah, interesting.
All
Great
right.
take.
What's your number 3 then?
I got Animals, and I mean, this is many times in my life has been my favorite Pink Floyd record. I really do love this. It was actually on a personal level, like, you know, you remember my very first record, like album, was the Beatles' Abbey Road. My very first compact disc was in fact Animals. So it was something that actually I remember, speaking of compact discs and Pink Floyd, you know, the one of the things about their music is that it has so many of those quiet moments and everything like that. I mean, you really have to have a good vinyl copy because otherwise you'll hear the pops and cracks. So when digital came out, it was, I mean, I was really excited because I knew that I could get some of these records and really just hear them very clean, because Pink Floyd is best, I think, in that kind of format, you know, where you don't have to worry about the pops and cracks, although I pretty much only listen to them on vinyl now. But yeah, so I love this record. It is from a historic standpoint, of course, the tour for Animals is what creates the Wall, because, you know, Waters is, I think a fan spit on him or something, or he spit on a fan because a fan was doing something in the front row. I can't remember the exact story. I'm sure somebody who's a Pink Floyd fan that's watching this is yelling at the screen right now. But yes, it was the tour for this. And I think while to some degree this is a more Waters driven project, it still has some great Gilmour moments as well. So it's almost like it's part Waters solo album, part Gilmour solo album, but with hints of each other's influences, like they were kind of trying to outdo each other in terms of the performance, and a little grittier than Dark Side of the Moon. And I think the vocals especially are really powerful on this particular record.
Okay. All right. So that's going to bring me down here to The Wall at number 3. And David, you hit it right on the head where you said just too much filler on The Wall. You know, I mean, it's got a lot of great moments on it, but compared to the other 2 albums I got ranked above this one, which have no filler, this thing is the reason why it's down here is because of the filler. You know, the other albums you can play all the way through with no issues, no nothing. It's just solid, phenomenal albums. But this one, The Wall, there's just a little too much fat on it. I wish they would have trimmed off some of it. I think it would have made for a more solid album. But don't get me wrong, obviously I'm not knocking The Wall, but
Break down the wall.
You know, I was worried because I go, man, I have The Wall at number 3. These guys are gonna tear me up and shred me out, because I'm thinking you guys probably had it at 1 or 2, and you guys didn't even. I don't know if you mentioned them yet, Tom. I know, I think you did.
No, I haven't.
Okay, but David did. So at least I know I'm not in the same boat. Me and David kind of think alike on this one. But that's the very reason, the Wall has, many, many great moments. I mean, all the airplay songs. One thing I really like on this album that obviously Run Like Hell, David mentioned. Mother, another classic song. Young Lost is another really, really phenomenal track on this album, though. There's just a lot on this album that I like. It's just that I just wish it was maybe 4 or 5 songs, trim off some of that fat that they could have done less with. And man, they would have another another masterpiece. It would have made it a lot harder ranking the top 3 for me. But because of the fact, that's why we're at number 3. So, and that's going to get us down to the top 2.
Yeah, my number 2 is Animals. Yeah, I mean, I think this album's definitely grown in stature for me over the last few years. I've come to appreciate it more. I mean, Dogs is great, Sheep is great. I mean, this is kind of like the first time we get like the angry Rogers writing on here is great. Is his political commentary. It's timeless. I mean, it's still relevant to everything we're going through today in a lot of ways. And I mean, like, this is the 2018 remix that didn't come out until like earlier this year because Roger and David were fighting over the liner notes. So I mean, it kind of encapsulates everything about the band, but it's just a great collaborative effort, I think, because I mean everybody has moments to shine on here. So yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite Pink Floyd albums.
All right. Well, Tom, you're gonna. I don't know which way to go with you on your number 2. Let's give it to me. Hit me.
Somebody stop me. No, my number 2 is The Wall. I in listening to you guys talk about the quote unquote filler of The Wall, I don't know how I feel about that. It's weird because it's that David said, which I agree with 100%, that you to me, like, even though there were some radio hits off of it, like Run Like Hell, and there's songs that stand well on their own, like Hey You, and of course, Another Brick in the Wall, part 2 was kind of played to death. I will say that side 1 and 2 of a 2 vinyl record set are pretty ridiculously amazing. I mean, if they did nothing after that and just, burped for the rest of the record, it would still be in the top 3. There's definitely a drop off by the time, I think the first song on side 3 is either like Hey You or Comfortably Numb. I mean, the second half definitely is not as good. And I think maybe it was just a little bit harder for him to wrap it all together. Cause like The Trial, I mean, that to me seems like on some level, a bit of a song that's a little bit forced. You sort of need it to end the story. But either way, it's just such a brilliant story. Just, I mean, the way it's written and the emotions that you go through. I think, like, if I was to compare this to, say, The Lamb Lies, if we looked at, say, Tommy the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and The Wall, can you think of anything else in terms of like an operatic double record? Am I missing one? I mean, unless you think like a Queensryche or whatever, which I'm not really familiar with, but I'll say of those 3, the big 3, Tommy, let's be honest, that story's a little goofy. It's about a deaf, dumb, and blind kid who plays pinball, and there's elements of it that have some similarities in The Wall, and that there's the World War II pilot or whatever, but it gets a little goofy. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is a really, really hard story to follow. It's just a very odd, kind of psychotic, or I don't know whatever you want to call it, psychedelic. I don't know. It's just a weird story. Like, it's hard to follow the storyline. Whereas I feel like with The Wall, and even before the film, it made sense the way the whole thing was laid out. You know what I mean? And the way it concludes. It all is just, it's just a very nice story. It's very believable, all the traumas that he goes through and all that kind of stuff. So I love this record. I mean, I really do. It's not one I listen to very often because it's as you get older, you don't necessarily have the time to sit down and listen to a really long 2 record set from beginning to end. But when I do listen to it, I just shake my head sometimes and go, my God, this thing is brilliant. It's just absolutely brilliant. And that's saying a lot because that's my number 2. It ain't even my number 1.
Yeah, pretty funny. I mentioned the Lamb. I got chastised on that one by you for picking it so high up on my list, but that was a good thing. Reason why. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, but I don't disagree with that. I mean, your reasoning I didn't disagree with. Again, I just think musically the Lamb has some very strong material on it. It's a good listen from beginning to end. But again, in terms of the story, it's just bizarre. I mean, even Tommy, they have like Uncle Ernie, you got this uncle that's molesting a kid. I mean, that's I mean, this is just kind of like, ooh, it's a little on the cringeworthy side. And in The Wall, you have a guy whose wife is cheating on him, which I will say in The Wall, that's to me, it's just the funniest thing. Like the operator, she's like, there's a man answering. I mean, can you imagine an operator getting involved in a phone call like that? There's hello, it's the United States calling. There's a man answering the phone. Your wife is cheating on you. It's just very funny. But yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to take me down to my number 2. And you probably know which one it is. Dark Side of the Moon. Dark Side of the Moon, number 2. And, great album. You guys have mentioned pretty much everything about it. I will say this, though. I could do without hearing Money ever again. I don't know why that song, everybody thinks it's so great. I mean, it's just probably, to me, it's the worst track on the album. I just cannot stand that song. I mean, I love the sound effects. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they did a great job on this one. I believe Alan Parsons worked with him on the engineering aspect of this one, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's as good as it gets there. Phenomenal recording, like you said. It's almost too perfect, but at the same time, who made an album up to that point that was so sonically, you know what I mean? It was like the first album that people can kind of remember that really took the sound to the next level. You know what I'm saying at that time, Tom?
Yeah, no, I agree. I'd say Sgt. Pepper and then Beach Boys, Pet Sounds. Those two were pretty groundbreaking in their era. And then it wasn't until Dark Side of the Moon that anybody really paid attention to the production and stuff like that. So I agree.
Yeah, but I mean, Dark Side of the Moon, definitely, I would say on most people's catalogs, rankings, it would definitely fall in the top 3 for sure. I thought all 3 of those albums that we were discussing here were all going to fall, different in between 1, 2, and 3. But some you guys actually had each of you had one of them outside of the top 3. It kind of surprised me. But having said that, I think we're all finally in agreement here. Let's see what David has.
Oh, goodness gracious, we might be because none of us have mentioned this one.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. My number 1, it's got to be "Wish You Were Here."
Yeah.
I mean, the Hypnosis album cover is iconic. It's one of the best. I mean, "Shine On You Crazy Diamond" is amazing. "I Have a Cigar," Roy Harper's vocal on that's killer. I mean, "Welcome to the Machine" is great. I mean, there's really nothing. I mean, the title track is epic. Also, it's just an iconic song. I can never get sick of hearing anything off this album. I mean, I remember I was interviewing Steven Wilson one time, and he said that this was one of his favorite Pink Floyd albums as well, but he never really needed to hear it again because it was so ingrained in his DNA growing up that it was just became a part of him. And I feel like that's kind of how I feel about this album. So it's just an album that I could put on at any time, and it's always going to be great. So yeah, when we decided we were going to do Pink Floyd, I pretty much knew what my number 1 was going to be. So
what do you want to add there, Tom?
I mean, I wasn't as certain it was going to be my number 1, but yeah, I mean, there's just something about it. It's just such a great record. And I think we, at some point we had talked about, follow-ups to great albums. I mean, this is the follow-up to Dark Side of the Moon. How do you follow up the album that spent the most time on the charts? But I think what's nice is that they didn't get bogged down in being too formulaic. This record, I don't know, maybe because it is thematically it was a something that was very close to them. And obviously they had kind of touched on it a little bit with Dark Side of the Moon in terms of the insanity and everything that had impacted them through Syd Barrett. And obviously I think Roger obviously has dealt with some serious emotional baggage through his years, and a lot of it's manifesting in his old age as well. But this is kind of like this ode to Syd Barrett. And it's just, it's like saying, man, thank you for giving us the gift of Pink Floyd. And now we're going to give you the gift of this album, because in so many ways, this is the record that immortalizes Syd Barrett more than anything. There's the legend of him showing up in the studio. There's the, whether or not they've said specifically Shine On You Crazy Diamond is about him or Wish You Were Here is about him. Obviously it is. And, but just the soundscape, it's just incredible. I mean, it's one of those records that just sucks you in. Like you can't not notice this record when you're playing it. I said Dark Side of the Moon, again, with its perfection, it's a kind of record you can sit there and enjoy. Wish You Were Here is one of those records that just kind of blows you away. It's just a great record.
Did you ever watch the documentary about the making of the album?
No. Is it one of those like 1 hour long ones or?
Yeah. They show some photos from when Syd Barrett came in the studio during the recording of the album, and he walked into the room. They didn't even recognize him because he looked completely different.
Yeah, I've seen the photo. Yeah, it's because he'd like shaved his eyebrows off, and man, and you think about that, that's got to be on some. I mean, this is a very different experience, but I'll share it with everybody out there, even though you probably don't care. But when my mom was in hospice and she was passing away, my ex-wife showed up, and I didn't recognize her. Like we had not seen each other in so long, and I didn't recognize her. I had to ask somebody who she was, and I thought about it afterwards, like, holy crap, I spent all this time with this person, slept in the same bed with them, had children with them, and then you see them and you don't even recognize them. I mean, on some level, they had to say, here's a guy that we used to hang out with. We went to school together with. We formed a band with him, and now we don't even recognize him. I mean, that's pretty intense, So I can kind of relate to where they were coming from on that. But yeah, and I think what Dark Side of the Moon lacks in that kind of extra like emotional component, you feel that more especially in Gilmour's playing. I mean, to me, this is the best thing Gilmour's ever done before or afterwards. To me, this is the record that said to the world, yeah, David Gilmour's an incredible guitarist, and don't forget it. Don't think that he's just Pink Floyd's guitarist. This guy's amazing,
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's the same for me. Number one here. I'm really shocked that this thing is only 6 times platinum right now. What in the world is going on here? How come this album only sold 6 times platinum? You're looking at Dark Side of the Moon at 15 times platinum, and you're looking at The Wall at 23 times platinum. So The Wall is actually their biggest selling album of their career by a landslide. Yet, here we are with what we all have deemed as their number one best album, and only six times platinum. It's kind of strange to see. I would assume they would have sold a lot more copies of this one. Maybe they just haven't updated the RIAA updates there, because sometimes that does happen. But yeah, like you said, Tom, though, the follow-up to Dark Side of the Moon, I think they hit a home run out of the park. You don't see too many albums with all the positives of the Dark Side of the Moon, and to come back with this album, even though it doesn't show it sales-wise, it definitely shows it in every other wise, how much more of a predominant album this one is here compared to the Dark Side of the Moon. It's just crazy,
Yeah, they did this. I mean, I think Dark Side of the Moon, if we think it, I mean, The Wall definitely got a ton of radio play, because you had what? Another Brick in the Wall, Run Like Hell, Comfortably Numb, and Hey You. I mean, I know those definitely got plays. That's 4,
Well, plus a
even
number
though it's a
one,
double album.
you had a number one with another brick in the wall, which,
Right.
usually a number one will add on a couple million
Yeah.
alone, usually.
And
Mm.
Dark
And had
Side
the
had
movie.
Dark Side had money, right? So
And the
money
movie.
was, yeah, Pink Floyd The Wall had the movie,
Yeah.
but the movie came out much later. But I'm saying
Right.
the Dark Side of the Moon had both Animals and Wish You Were Here. I can't think of anything from Animals that gets played on a regular basis. And the only thing off of Wish You Were Here that really gets played is maybe the title cut. But again, it's not like a super, popular song like Money or Another Brick in the Wall, and then Have a Cigar. But Have a Cigar is a bit of an outlier because it's not even sung by one of the members of the band.
Mm.
So I just don't think it had, I don't know that people even, there's some songs, it's like you hear them on the radio, you don't even know who the heck sings them. So you just like the song. I mean, to me, like Have a Cigar, probably a lot of people wouldn't have known it was Pink Floyd if it wasn't for the line in there. Oh, by the way, which one's pink? Which by the way is a great line, but anyhow. And if you get a chance, there's a Radio Chaos tour version of Have a Cigar with Paul Carrick doing lead vocals. That is phenomenal. I love Paul Carrick.
Interesting. All right. Well, that puts a wrap on the Pink Floyd here. That was a very revealing episode here. We actually agreed on an album for the number one, which doesn't happen often.
I don't know if it's ever happened. Well, Rush, but I think we all have Moving Pictures, right?
Yeah. Well, it was just me and you with that one, though.
Yeah. But I'm sure, David, what's your favorite Rush album, David?
Yeah, probably Moving Pictures. I think it's the best. I think the best encapsulates everything about the band. So
yeah, you can't beat that one. So
yeah, I think we'll have to take a digger deep into Yes here now that once this new album comes out, we'll have to dig into Yes more, because remember when we did them, Tom, I think we only did like the top 10 Yes albums. It'd be interesting to do the whole catalog now that we got David here too. That would be especially after last night. I mean, you definitely want to dig deeper into that catalog and see
we may have to take a week off of work for that catalog though. Knowing us. I mean, yeah. Either that or get a really good editor.
Yeah, especially just for Topographic Oceans alone.
Oh,
yeah,
geez.
I know. Like, yeah. By the time we get to like number 11, we're gonna need a nap. It's like, all right, guys, hold on, let's take a nap and come back to this. That's a lot of records.
Yeah.
I wonder what band has like the most records ever. It's got to be somebody like Frank Zappa.
Yeah, he's up there. That's for sure.
Or we could rank all the post-death Jimi Hendrix records.
Oh, jeez.
that would take us, 6 months.
Bob Dylan's got a ton also.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think Hendrix has 50 or something
wow.
Posthumous. I love that word, posthumously released.
All right. Well, it was a great episode here. Can't wait to see some of the comments out there. So don't hesitate to put your spin on, how we did with the rankings here. We got a lot of
Be
variety.
nice though, folks. Be nice.
We definitely had a lot of variety here on this one. Just kind of still shocked that we all picked Wish You Were Here as the first, but that's awesome. We're all on the same page with that one for sure. So stay tuned for more, and we'll probably calm down a little bit during the summer here with all the stuff going on here. But as we get some albums ranked, we'll post them. So just keep a look, subscribe. That way you won't miss any of them. Hit that subscribe button. All right, guys. Sounds good.